Silence hung in the courtroom like a suspended verdict, thick, unmoving, and ready to crash. Imani Carter stood trembling beneath the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights, her hands clenched so tightly the paper beneath them had begun to tear. Her breath caught in her throat, but her eyes held something deeper than fear, something cracked and ancient, like a dam about to break. The man beside her, James Holloway, sat stoic and smug, his lawyer whispering with the confidence of someone expecting an easy win. The judge asked the question again, softer this time. "Is this your father?" Imani's voice broke through the tension like glass, fragile but sharp. "He's not my father," gasps echoed. Papers dropped. And then, just as the judge leaned forward, the heavy oak doors behind them groaned open, and the room turned toward the man who stepped through the light. The moment cracked the room open like lightning across a clear sky. Judge Rebecca Miles froze for half a second, her fingers still curled around the gavel she hadn't yet used. The noise, the energy, the shift, it all rippled through the walls. James Holloway's jaw twitched. For the first time that morning, something in his eyes faltered. The murmurs started almost immediately. The court stenographer stopped typing. Even the security guard near the jury box stiffened, hand grazing the baton at his side. Spectators leaned forward, uncertain if they'd just heard a girl unravel a family tree with a single sentence. Imani remained still, her back straight and her face unreadable. She didn't meet James's gaze. Instead, her eyes locked onto the old American flag above the judge's bench, its faded colors as tired as the lies she had carried for years. Judge Miles's voice cut through the static again, this time sharper, wary. "Miss Carter, I need you to clarify under oath. Are you saying the man seated beside you is not your biological father?" "I'm saying," Imani said, her voice quivering but unwavering, "he never was." The gasp that followed was louder this time, like a collective exhale of disbelief. A woman in the gallery placed a hand over her mouth. A reporter in the back dropped his pen. James Holloway stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," he bellowed. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering fast, desperate words meant to reel him back in. "We have DNA tests, legal custody since she was a toddler." "This girl is lying," James said, his voice slipping between disbelief and something colder, fear. Imani turned her head, not to answer him, but to speak to the room. "He raised me, yes, but he's not my blood, not my truth." The judge rapped the gavel once. Order in this courtroom. But the energy had shifted. It wasn't coming back. Imani's public defender tried to whisper into her ear, but she didn't flinch, didn't move. Her eyes were still steady, her voice still echoing. Judge Miles exhaled deeply, opened a dusty manila folder from the bench, a file labeled Carter v. Holloway in black marker. The ink fading. It had been sealed for over a decade. Emergency custody was granted 15 years ago. The mother, Tasha Carter, deceased in a house fire. Paternity never contested. Signed off by Judge Stanley Parrish, who'd passed years ago under suspicion of misconduct. Miles narrowed her eyes at the final page. Biological father unknown. Mother Tasha Carter. Something about that name tugged at a long-buried memory. A protest. A photo. A funeral. The gavel had barely hit the block again when the rear courtroom doors creaked open. Slowly, deliberately. All heads turned. The chatter dropped into a strange, heavy stillness. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dark-skinned, and motionless. He wore a charcoal trench coat, old but clean, and underneath a faded denim shirt. His face was marked by time, but his eyes were wide open, searching, wet with something unspoken. Imani turned toward him instinctively. The change in her expression was slight but telling. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips parted, her breath faltered, her eyes, usually guarded like steel, widened just slightly, as if a sliver of recognition cracked through. The judge leaned forward. "Sir, who are you?" The man didn't blink. "My name is Darius Lewis," he said, voice gravelly but composed. "I believe I'm this girl's father." James Holloway erupted from his seat. "This is a goddamn circus," he shouted. "Your Honor, this man is not." But Judge Miles was already calling for order, slamming her gavel again. The courtroom had lost all sense of routine. "Clear the courtroom," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "Recess. 15 minutes. Bailiff, escort Mr. Lewis to my chambers, now." In the side room, the air was tighter. Imani sat across from the man who claimed to be her father. She said nothing at first. Neither did he. He reached into his coat pocket slowly, gently, and slid a worn photograph across the table. A young woman, radiant and brown-skinned, held a baby close to her chest. Around the woman's neck was a small silver pendant, an unmistakable match to the one hanging now from Imani's throat. "I've had this since the night she died," Darius said softly. "That woman was Tasha Carter, your mother. And you, baby girl, you were stolen from me." Imani's fingers brushed the photo. Her chest tightened. That pendant. James always called it cheap, unimportant, meaningless. She never believed him. The judge entered. Her presence carried a new energy. She looked shaken, like a woman whose past just brushed against her shoulder. She stared at Darius, then at the photograph, then at Imani.
"Where did you get that photo?" she asked, voice low and trembling.
Darius's reply was measured and clear. From the night she died, the night they said was an accident. Imani's voice barely registered, yet it silenced the room. "I don't think it was." Gasps filled the courtroom like smoke after a spark, thin at first, then dense and rising fast. The man stood in the doorway unmoving, absorbing every stare with quiet gravity. Tall and dark-skinned, he looked like someone carved from old wounds in silence. His eyes, rimmed red and glistening, never left Imani's. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, not at first, but when he did, the words were soft, hoarse, and blistered with truth. "I found my daughter." Judge Rebecca Miles leaned back in her chair as if she'd been physically struck. Her gaze narrowed as recognition dawned, slow, disbelieving, and then sharp. "Darius Lewis," she whispered, not loud enough for the courtroom to hear, but loud enough for herself. The name sat in her mouth like dust from a forgotten file. He had been declared legally dead in a fire 15 years ago. She remembered the case, remembered the protests, remembered the photograph of a charred house and the rumors swirling behind it. Darius Lewis, civil rights attorney, community advocate, and now, somehow, standing right here. James Holloway looked as if the floor had tilted beneath him. His face remained stone, but the pressure behind his eyes was unmistakable. He turned slightly, watching as reporters in the gallery reached for phones, cameras, and mics. A court officer had already slipped out to alert security, but it was too late. Chaos, once invited, never left quietly. The judge slammed her gavel once. "This courtroom is in recess. 15 minutes. Bailiff, escort Mr. Lewis to my chambers immediately." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were restless. As court officials began clearing the gallery, James's lawyer reached for him, but he waved her off. He didn't blink, he didn't speak, and he didn't look at Imani. Imani was already moving. The second the judge declared recess, she shot up from her seat, her legs trembling with momentum and emotion. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for answers. She just ran. Down the aisle, past the press, through the hallway that smelled of old wood and stale coffee, until she burst through the double doors and into the sunlight. The sudden heat outside struck her like a slap. Summer in Atlanta, heavy, unforgiving, and raw. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Fast, determined. "Imani," he called, his voice rough from disuse, or grief, or both. "Please, wait." She didn't. She kept moving across the concrete courtyard outside the courthouse, her sneakers smacking the pavement, her breath catching in sharp bursts. But he was faster, not because of speed, but because her legs and her heart were unsure of where to go. "Imani, stop," he yelled again. She stopped, spun around, and screamed. "Why?" Her voice cracked the air open like thunder. A few heads turned across the courtyard, but no one came closer. "Not yet." "Why did you leave me to grow up with a stranger?" she said again, quieter this time. Her voice no longer thunder, just thunderstruck. Her chest heaved, her fists were clenched, and her eyes, filled with fury and ache, stared into his like she was trying to crawl back through time and drag answers out of his silence. Darius slowed as he reached her. His eyes were already spilling. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you I thought you were gone too." "You let me rot in that house," she snapped. "No," he whispered, barely audible. "I searched for you, for years. They told me you died with your mother." "You knew my mother?" she asked, voice razor thin. He nodded. Tasha was everything. For a moment, the words hung between them like ghosts with names. "She died in a fire," Imani said bitterly. "That's what James told me. Said she wasn't strong enough to protect me." Darius winced like she'd punched him. "He said that?" "He said she was selfish," Imani hissed, "that she brought danger on herself, that I was lucky he saved me." Darius shook his head, tears dripping now. "No, baby. She died trying to protect the truth." Imani stared at him. Her eyes widened just slightly. Her breath hitched. "Truth?" she asked. He nodded. "About the system, the corruption, the police department, the judges. James was part of it. So was the judge who handed you to him." Imani backed up, shaking her head. "You're lying. You're trying to fix 15 years of absence with fairy tales." "I have proof," he said. "What kind of proof?" He didn't answer. Not yet. He stepped forward slowly and reached into his coat pocket. Not the photo again. Something else. A folded page, old and smudged. A court document, partially burned at the edges. I found this hidden in the wall of our old house, he said. Tasha wrote it before she died. She didn't trust anyone to mail it, not even me.
Imani didn't move.
He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Her mother's handwriting, curvy, precise, urgent. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. My baby is in danger. They're trying to erase me. If she survives, tell her the truth. Imani felt the page shake in her hands. But it wasn't the wind. Darius stepped back, his voice choked. I thought you were gone. That night they set the fire and made it look like I died too. I was dragged out by a neighbor, but they never filed the report. I was a threat. They erased me. Why now? She asked, trembling. He took a long breath. A month ago, I submitted a DNA test through an ancestry database, just in case, and someone flagged a connection, a distant cousin, and then your name. I knew I had to come. I didn't know if you'd believe me. I didn't even know if you'd want me. Imani looked up from the letter, her eyes sharp. I don't know what I want. I understand, he said softly. You think this makes us family now? I hope it makes us truth. Behind them, reporters had begun to gather. One cameraman stood with his lens aimed, waiting. A courthouse employee whispered into a radio. The crowd outside was growing.
I'm not ready to forgive you, Imani said finally.
I'm not asking for that, he replied. I'm asking for a chance to tell you what they did to us. She looked back at the courthouse doors, at the crowd forming, at the letter in her hand, then back at the man who had just shattered her understanding of everything. I'm listening, she whispered. The air shifted as they stepped away from the courthouse crowd, into a nearby alley shaded by brick buildings that whispered with old city secrets. Imani still clutched the letter, creased now, damp in her hand. She hadn't spoken since she said, I'm listening, but the silence between her and Darius was not empty. It pulsed with everything unspoken, 15 years of separation, betrayal, and questions that clawed the edges of her throat. She leaned against the wall, not to rest but to anchor herself, because what she'd just learned was only the surface. She could feel it. The real story was still buried. Darius stood a few feet away, watching her with the restraint of a man who knew too much pain could crush a moment too quickly. He took a breath, slow and steady, then spoke. Your mother died, he said gently, but you were stolen. Imani flinched. He continued. Tasha and I, we were civil rights lawyers. She was sharper than me, stronger. We worked out of a small office just outside Fulton County, focused on police abuse, racial profiling, unlawful convictions, and we were getting close to something big. We had testimonies, audio, a signed affidavit from an officer willing to flip. We were going to bring the whole thing down. Imani blinked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened? They found out, he said. Someone in the department must have tipped them off. A few days before we were supposed to go public, there was a break-in at our home. Files missing, notes gone. 2 nights later, the fire. The word burned as it left his lips. Tasha was home, he added, his voice cracking. I was supposed to be there too, but I got delayed. A car accident that stopped me from making it back. And when I arrived, it was gone. Flames everywhere. I ran in screaming her name. Imani stared at him, tears now sliding quietly down her cheek. They told me she died in the flames, Darius said, swallowing. They told me you died too. But they lied. Both of you were taken from the wreckage. I didn't find out until years later. She turned her face slightly, eyes narrowed. Then why didn't you come for me? I tried, he said. But by the time I started digging again, your name had changed. Court documents were sealed. No one would talk. And the judge who finalized your custody, Stanley Parrish, was dirty. We always suspected, but there was never proof. James Holloway, Imani said, almost to herself. He always said he knew the judge. He didn't just know him, Darius replied. They were part of the same web. Holloway used his money and connections to shut things down. When Parrish signed those papers, no one questioned it. A black baby, mother dead, no known father. It was easy to bury. But I was alive, she whispered. And I didn't know until last month, he said. I submitted DNA to a genealogy site, just in case. It flagged a second cousin, someone connected to you. I paid for every record, every database search. And then I saw your name, Imani Carter Holloway. And I knew the second I saw your photo. She said nothing, just stared. I couldn't protect you, he added. Not then. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. The words landed heavy. I was in that house for years, she finally said. James never hit me. But he made me feel like I owed him, like he saved me from a woman who didn't care. He never showed me pictures of my mother, never told me her name, said I was better off not knowing. Darius closed his eyes. He erased her. He erased me too, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something folded in a thin leather case. It looked old, edges worn, seams fraying. He opened it and gently removed a photograph. I want you to see something, he said. She stepped forward hesitantly. In the picture, a younger Tasha Carter stood in a sunlit park, holding a baby girl with big brown eyes and curly hair. The woman's face beamed with warmth and a fierceness that felt familiar, uncannily familiar. Around her neck, hanging close to the baby's chest, was a small silver pendant, delicate, etched. Imani's breath hitched. She instinctively reached for her own. The same pendant hung from her neck now. She wore that every day, Darius said. After you were born, she never took it off. Had your initials carved on the inside. Ton TCI. Imani whispered, her fingers trembling over the metal. Tasha, Carter, Imani, he said. She wanted you to always know who you came from. Imani felt something crack deep inside, deeper than bones, beyond memory. It was the feeling of something long buried rising up, clawing through layers of silence. She looked at the baby in the photo, then back at him. This is real? She asked. It always was, he said, but they made you forget. She stepped back, breath shallow. I need time. I need space to think. I'll give you that, Darius nodded, but I have more to show you. Your mother didn't just die in that fire. She left pieces behind, and I think she knew, one day you'd come looking. Imani stared at the photograph one last time, and then at the man who for the first time in her life didn't ask her to shrink. Imani clutched the pendant like it had just started beating. Warmth rose from the metal, or maybe that was her imagination, but something about it felt different now. Not just a keepsake, not just a relic from a life she had been told to forget. It was as if the necklace itself was suddenly alive with memory, charged with the weight of things unsaid. Her fingers curled around it tighter, thumb brushing the curve of the T. She'd worn it nearly every day since she was a child, despite James Holloway's sneering dismissal. It's just cheap jewelry, he used to say, voice dripping with contempt. Your real gifts are the ones I gave you. But now she knew. It wasn't cheap, and it wasn't his to dismiss. They were back in Darius's rented apartment, barely furnished. Papers and old files spread across the table like a war plan. The city buzzed outside the cracked window, but inside the air was still, heavy. Imani sat on the edge of a couch that squeaked every time she moved, her eyes locked on the pendant in her palm. She had taken it off for the first time in years, really looking at it. Darius stood nearby, holding a worn leather folder with more photos and documents he'd pieced together since discovering she was alive. But he didn't speak, not yet. He knew better than to interrupt what was happening in her mind. Finally, she looked up. These letters, she said, tracing the engravings inside the silver backing. T.C.I., my initials. Darius nodded. Tasha had it custom made. She was pregnant when we designed it together. She wanted something that would tie the three of us together no matter what. Even if the world tried to split us apart. Imani nodded slowly, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. The memories were forming like fog lifting after a long sleep. A voice, a scent, the echo of a lullaby not quite remembered. She wasn't sure if it was real memory or just her mind desperately reconstructing the truth. But it didn't matter. It felt real. I used to hear a woman's voice in my dreams, she whispered. Soft, like music behind a door. I used to think it was God. Or Darius sat beside her, carefully, not closing the distance too much. She was always humming. That was her way of calming the storm. Even when things got bad, she would put her hand on your back and hum like the world couldn't touch us. Imani blinked fast. James never sang. Of course not, Darius said. He wasn't family. She turned the pendant again. There's a seam, she murmured. Darius leaned closer. What? Right here, she said, pointing to the edge of the pendant where the two halves joined. It's subtle, but it opens. I always thought it was just where they fused the metal. He reached for a magnifying glass from his folder. Let me see. They worked together, under the small desk lamp, hands shaking slightly, breath held. Darius used a small pocket tool to gently pry at the seam. It gave with a soft click. The back of the pendant loosened and came off like a hidden lid. Inside was a tiny cylindrical strip, dark, almost dust-covered, thin as thread, a glimmer of plastic glinting under the light. Darius went still. That's microfilm. Imani stared. What does that mean? He carefully removed it with tweezers, laying it gently on a clean white envelope. It means your mother hid something. Something small but powerful enough to protect like this. Evidence? Imani asked. Most likely, he said. Microfilm was how people used to preserve documents, especially sensitive ones. It's impossible to alter, and it's nearly invisible if you're not looking. Imani sat back, stunned. She hid it on me. All this time. She was smart, Darius said. She knew if anything happened to her, the pendant might be all that survived. And James never knew? He wouldn't have looked. He didn't care enough to check. All he saw was a trophy, a girl no one would fight for. Imani's heart pounded harder. We have to see what's on it. I know a guy, Darius said quickly. Tech archivist. Quiet. Trustworthy. He works out of an old university library in West End. He can digitize it. Imani stood, adrenaline flooding her system. Let's go. They moved fast. The streets blurred by as they drove through Atlanta's winding lanes. The heat had thickened into an early evening haze, but neither of them noticed. Inside the car, the pendant sat in a small velvet pouch in Imani's lap, the microfilm carefully wrapped in archival paper. She didn't speak the whole way, just stared out the window as street lamps flickered on like watching eyes. Darius parked behind an old brick building with ivy-covered windows and graffiti near the rear door. They walked through a narrow hallway and down into a basement space lit by green desk lamps and humming machines. Ezra, Darius said as they entered. We need your help. A wiry man with graying locks looked up from behind a pile of microfilm readers. He wore thick glasses and a NASA hoodie. I need you to run something, Darius said, urgently, quietly. Ezra raised an eyebrow. This about what I think it is? Darius nodded. Imani stepped forward and placed the film on the table. Without another word, Ezra powered up a machine and loaded the film with surgical precision. The room dimmed as the screen glowed. For a few seconds, only static and gray lines flickered. Then text, typed, dated, official-looking headers. Ezra leaned closer, whistling low. This is real, he murmured. Holy hell, Darius, this is very real. What is it? Imani asked, her voice tight. Court documents, police memos, internal emails, all naming officers and judges in a coordinated suppression network, Ezra said, scrolling slowly. There's even payroll records. Payments funneled through construction contracts to silence victims' families. It's all here. Darius leaned over the screen, stunned. This is what we were building toward. This is what they tried to burn. Imani's hands trembled at her sides. They destroyed her, to keep this quiet, she whispered. Ezra kept scrolling, then froze. A name appeared. James Holloway. Next to it, payment details, a signature, a judge's initials, S. Parrish. Ezra looked up. He wasn't just involved, he bankrolled part of it. Imani's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of the desk, staring at the screen, at the cold digital evidence of the man who raised her, who lied to her, gaslit her, controlled her, etched forever into the records her mother had died to protect. What do we do now? She asked, her voice breaking. Darius's face darkened with resolve. We bring it into the light. The room was dim except for the cold blue glow of the microfilm reader. The screen flickered slightly, but the words were sharp. Inside that tiny sliver of plastic, hidden in a pendant worn around Imani's neck for 15 years, was a time capsule, not of memories, but of truth. A truth no one had ever meant to see. A 15-year-old exposé, crafted in secret by a woman silenced in flames, now blazing again across digital light. As Ezra scrolled through each document, silence gripped the room. It wasn't shock, it was reverence. The files detailed a county-wide conspiracy, police misconduct buried under falsified reports, prosecutors exchanging sentences for favors, and court-appointed attorneys colluding to sabotage black defendants in exchange for career advancement. But the most damning entries were financial, payments, names, sums of money disguised as construction contracts and community grants, flowing steadily from one central figure to the operatives underneath. James Holloway. Imani stared at the screen as his name surfaced again and again. He wasn't just mentioned. He wasn't some tangential figure lurking in the background. He was a node, a distributor. He paid for silence. He funded the machine that devoured her mother, and swallowed the life she could have had. There were emails signed with his name, memos copied to his office, meeting notes with initials, JH, circled in red. Darius said nothing for a long time. His fists were tight on his thighs. His jaw pulsed. We were this close, he murmured, the grief fresh again. Tasha and I, we had enough to blow it wide open. She said if anything happened, the backup files had to be hidden. I didn't know she meant, inside the damn necklace. Imani leaned against the edge of the desk, her face pale but burning beneath the surface. He told me she was a mistake, that she brought chaos into my life, that she was selfish. She shook her head. All this time he made me think I should be grateful he saved me. Ezra slowly turned toward her. You weren't saved. You were stolen. The truth rang louder than any accusation. Outside, the city buzzed in its ordinary rhythm. But inside, something irreversible had begun. A reclamation. A resurrection. We need to go public, Imani said. Darius nodded. But not through social media. Not at first. We need someone with reach. Someone who won't let it get buried again. I know who, Imani replied, her voice hardening. My teacher from junior year, Miss Chambers. She freelances now, writes for the Atlanta Tribune. She used to talk about real journalism. She always told me, if you find truth, protect it, then scream it. They drove straight from West End to Decatur, where Camille Chambers lived in a restored duplex tucked between an overgrown churchyard and a family-owned barbershop. The night had settled into a deep Georgia blue, heat still rising off the sidewalk as the wheels crunched into the gravel driveway. Camille answered the door in slippers, still holding a mug of tea. Imani Carter, she said, smiling until she saw the look on Imani's face. Her eyes narrowed. What happened? Everything, Imani replied. Within minutes, Camille had cleared her dining table and powered on her recording equipment. Her house smelled like sage and lemon oil. Jazz whispered from a speaker in the corner. But the tension cut through it all like a knife. Darius laid out the microfilm files. Camille's eyes widened as she read. Her fingers trembled only once, when she saw Judge Parrish's name. Then again, when she reached James Holloway's.
This is historic, she whispered. You understand that, right?
We do, Darius said. That's why we need you to run it. Publish it, protect it, and verify every inch, Imani added, before they try to bury it again. Camille leaned back, one hand over her mouth. This isn't just a story. This is a bomb. And if we drop it wrong, they'll silence you for good. Then we drop it loud, Darius said. Camille spent the next 3 hours photographing every page, backing them up to 3 separate encrypted drives and cross-referencing the files with existing records. Her face changed with every match, every date that lined up, every signature she recognized. Around midnight, exhausted but determined, they packed everything into a locked briefcase Camille provided. Imani carried it in her lap the whole way home, arms wrapped around it like a shield. Darius drove silently, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. He had lived too long in the shadows not to notice when eyes were watching. The city seemed quieter than usual, the streets emptier, as if something was holding its breath. They parked in front of the apartment and climbed the narrow stairs to the door. Imani clutched the case tighter. As they reached the landing, Darius paused. His key was already in the door. He hadn't left it that way. He exchanged a glance with Imani, who froze. He opened the door slowly, heart pounding. The apartment was ransacked. Drawers open, files scattered, the laptop smashed on the floor, the envelope that had once held the microfilm, torn and empty. Imani rushed to the table. No. The briefcase, Darius said. She looked down. The one in her hands, it was still locked, intact. He exhaled, slowly. They didn't get everything. But they knew we had something, she whispered. They came looking. There was no note, no sign of forced entry. Just the silence. The kind that said, we see you. Darius knelt beside the smashed laptop, lifting the pieces with careful fingers. We back everything up again. Tonight, new locations, off-site. And we don't stay here, Imani added. They're watching. He nodded. Outside, a car idled at the curb before pulling away without headlights. Imani walked to the window and stared out into the dark, her chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. They know we have it, she said. Darius stepped beside her, silent. Then let's make sure they know we're not scared, she whispered. But somewhere in the city, in a quiet office with no name on the door, a man in a navy suit opened a stolen folder and smiled. They're getting close, he said to the phone. A voice on the other end replied, cold and final, then burn it down again. The glass shattered before they even saw the brick. 1 second, the car was still in the driveway, untouched. The next, Darius heard a sickening crack from the rear passenger side. Shards sprayed across the seat like icy confetti, and the brick landed with a thud beside Imani's backpack. She screamed and ducked, heart racing, fists clenched. Darius rushed outside, but the street was already empty. Whoever did it was long gone. No witnesses, no camera, no sound but the brittle crunch of glass beneath his boots. He bent down and picked up the brick. A single sheet of paper was taped to it. Block letters, scrawled in red marker. Stay silent, or stay buried. Darius crumpled the note in his hand, his jaw tightening. He looked back at Imani through the cracked windshield. Her eyes were wide, her breath fast, but she wasn't crying. She was past tears. She was burning. They didn't call the police. There was no point. Darius taped up the broken window with plastic and duct tape from the garage, then double-locked every door in the apartment. Imani sat at the table, arms crossed, the briefcase still at her feet like a guard dog. She hadn't said much since the incident, but her silence wasn't fear, it was calculation. Her mind was moving, fast and sharp, trying to stay ahead of whatever shadow had just thrown a warning through their world. "They're watching us," she finally said. Darius nodded. "They've been watching since I stepped back into that courtroom." "You think it's James?" "Maybe, or someone working with him. He has friends in high places and deep pockets." Imani looked at the note again. "They think this will scare us." Darius crouched beside her, his voice low. "It should. But we don't stop. We move smarter. We protect ourselves." The next morning, he installed a new deadbolt, changed both phone numbers, and set up a private signal alert system with Camille Chambers in case of emergency. He also called an old friend, an ex-cop who left the force after testifying against a corrupt sergeant. The man arrived the next day with a burner phone, a hidden camera, and a very quiet handgun. Imani didn't flinch when she saw the gun. She just asked, "Where do we go next?" But the real danger wasn't just on the streets. Darius had a sinking feeling the leak had come from inside the courthouse. Someone had been tracking their movements, knew when they'd be home, knew where the files were hidden. He started combing through names, security officers, court clerks, even public defenders. He made a list and cross-referenced it with those mentioned in the microfilm. One name appeared twice. Meanwhile, across town, Judge Rebecca Miles sat alone in her chambers, staring at an old file. Tasha Carter v. State of Georgia. She hadn't stopped thinking about it since Darius walked through her courtroom doors. That case had passed through her predecessor's hands, but she'd seen the aftermath, the fire, the sealed records, the quick, clean signatures that had wiped a child from public record. And now that child was alive and unsealing everything with her bare hands. Judge Miles began making quiet inquiries, calls to court archivists, private messages to retired colleagues, silent checks on the clerk's logbooks. She found discrepancies, unfiled addendums, a 2009 record that claimed Tasha's remains had never been positively identified, contrary to the death certificate. And then she pulled Imani's old school records. The first file, from elementary school, listed her as adopted at age 2. No parental medical history, no vaccination forms signed by a biological guardian, all sealed. By middle school, her school counselor noted emotional withdrawal, identity confusion, possible trauma history. But the page ended abruptly. The report was never followed up. Then came the final file, senior year. The file was pristine. Too pristine. Medical records were blank. Psychological assessments were removed. Even her legal birth certificate was missing, replaced with a forged version that listed James Holloway and unknown female guardian. Judge Miles stared at the screen, horrified. They hadn't just taken Imani. They had erased her. That afternoon, she received an unmarked envelope in her private mailbox at the courthouse. No return address, no stamp, just her name, printed neatly on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, "You're digging too deep. Let the past stay buried." Her hand trembled as she lowered the letter. She looked around her chambers, out the small window to the street below. Cars moved like ants across the grid. Nothing out of place, but she felt it, a presence. She wasn't just a judge now. She was a target. Back at the apartment, Darius double-checked every lock for the third time that evening. Imani was pacing in the kitchen, a pen in her hand, scribbling names across a yellow notepad. She turned toward him. "I want to subpoena the adoption files." He raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "I want it all," she said. "Every signature, every stamp, every fake excuse they used to take me. We'd need a judge brave enough to authorize that." She met his eyes. "We already have one." Darius exhaled. "Then we better move fast, before someone decides to silence her too." In her office, Judge Miles stared at the anonymous letter again. She picked up the phone, fingers hesitating over the keypad. Then she dialed. It rang once. Twice. A man answered. "You were right," she said quietly. "They're watching, and they're scared." The voice on the other end asked, "What will you do?" Judge Miles looked down at Imani's school file, at the blank lines where a mother's name should have been. I'm going to make them regret ever thinking they could erase her. The cuffs clicked tight around James Holloway's wrists just as the morning sun broke through the clouds. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway of his mansion in the Brookhaven suburbs, wrapped in a navy robe, blinking at the swarm of officers storming his home. His face, always unreadable, cracked for the first time. Not with fear, but with something colder, calculation. As if this had been inevitable. As if he'd always known the day would come. FBI agents moved through the marble-floored entryway like shadows, lifting drawer after drawer of falsified court orders, sealed financial reports, and forged adoption records. In his home office, a steel safe behind a portrait of Judge Stanley Parrish held the most damning proof yet. Handwritten memos, payment schedules marked with initials, and a photo of Tasha Carter with a red X slashed across it. Next to it, stapled to the back of an old court transcript, was a list of monthly payments made out to cooperative parties. James Holloway's name was signed at the bottom of each page. At the precinct, the mood shifted once they closed the interrogation room door. He sat with his hands flat on the table, eyes low, voice soft. No arrogance, just surrender. Not the kind born of guilt, but the kind born of a man who'd lost control of the narrative. I didn't mastermind any of it, he said after a long silence. I was a pawn, a well-paid one. The agent across from him leaned forward. Then who did? James lifted his eyes slowly. Richard Caldwell. The room paused. The senator. The golden boy of Georgia's conservative elite. Political heavyweight. U.S. senator. Presidential hopeful. Caldwell's my cousin, James continued. He backed me financially. He made the calls when the judge needed nudging. I was just the cleanup man. They gave me the child. I was told to raise her quietly, keep her out of public view, never speak the mother's name again. In exchange, I got contracts, land, protection. And you agreed? James Holloway gave a hollow chuckle. Of course I did. You ever say no to a man like Richard Caldwell? News of the arrest broke by mid-morning. Camille Chambers published the first article within the hour. Businessman tied to historic civil rights cover-up, arrested in Atlanta suburb. Within minutes, national outlets picked it up. By noon, Imani's face was on every screen, every scroll, every phone. Not as a missing girl anymore, but as a survivor who had returned from the dead to burn a system to the ground. Imani watched the coverage in stunned silence, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Messages from classmates, strangers, other survivors. But one text froze her breath. A number she didn't recognize. Ms. Carter, Senator Caldwell would like to speak with you. Privately. There was an address attached, a high-rise suite in downtown Atlanta. No other instructions. She handed the phone to Darius. He read it, frowned. He's getting nervous. I want to go, Imani said, voice steady. Darius shook his head. He's dangerous. He's desperate, she corrected. And desperate men talk. You go, you don't go alone. Imani nodded. Then you're coming with me. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Miles met privately with a federal prosecutor. The evidence from Holloway's home was damning, but fragile. The kind of case powerful men slither out of when pressure mounts. Caldwell had friends in D.C., friends who knew how to delay hearings and bury subpoenas. The prosecutor warned her, if we're going after him, we need more than paperwork. We need public heat.
I've got the match, Miles replied, and I think I know how to light it.
That night, the suite was quiet. Too quiet. Imani stepped out of the elevator first, her hair tied back, dressed simply. Darius followed close behind, his eyes scanning the hallway. 2 guards flanked the suite door, dressed in dark suits and Bluetooth earpieces. You're expected, one of them said. They entered a room bathed in soft gold lighting and scented faintly with cigar smoke and expensive leather. At the far end, behind a massive desk, sat Senator Richard Caldwell. He looked nothing like the press photos. Older, thinner, paler than expected. But his eyes still gleamed with the polish of someone who knew power intimately, how to wield it, how to wear it. Imani, he said, standing slowly. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. She didn't offer her hand.
You stole my life.
He sighed. I gave you a better one. She stepped forward. You gave me silence. You gave me lies. Darius remained by the door, watching, ready. Caldwell gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. Neither of them moved. The senator leaned on the desk. You've started something, young lady. Something uncontrollable. I imagine that feels good now, but it won't last. Imani raised an eyebrow. You think this is about attention? I think this is about vengeance. he said smoothly. And I understand that. I really do. But movements like this, they crash, they burn. And when they do, the people behind them go down with the fire. You saying that as a warning or a confession? Darius asked. Caldwell chuckled. Call it experience. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the desk. Inside are 3 things, he said. A trust fund, college admittance letters, and a non-disclosure agreement. Imani stared at the folder like it was poison. You're offering me money to walk away? I'm offering you peace, Caldwell said. A new life, a quiet one. You've made your point, but this goes no further. You walk away with your future intact. What if I say no? She asked. He looked at her for a long time, the smile draining from his face. Then you won't have a future to walk into. She didn't blink. Is that a threat? It's a prediction, he said coldly. She turned toward the door. I'll take that as a no, Caldwell called after her. Imani paused, turned back and whispered just loud enough. You were right about one thing. He raised an eyebrow. This won't last, she said. It'll grow. It'll burn so bright they'll name laws after it. As they exited the suite, Darius checked his phone. Camille had texted. We just got a leak from inside Caldwell's office. Audio, video, whistleblower. It's enough to bury him. Imani looked out over the city, her hands clenched. They tried to buy my silence. Darius nodded. Let's sell them the truth instead. You want your story buried, or your father buried. The words floated across the room like poison, elegant and venomous. Senator Richard Caldwell's voice had dropped into a dangerous register. Not loud, not threatening in tone, but laced with the kind of power that didn't need to raise itself. He stood at the bar of the luxury suite now, stirring 2 fingers of bourbon in a crystal glass, eyes flickering with cold amusement. Imani Carter didn't move. She sat across from him, legs crossed, phone face down in her lap, recording. He turned slowly, sipping. You're standing on a powder keg. You know that, don't you? These documents, these claims, even if they're true, you really want to unleash that on this country. You want to start fires you can't put out? She stared at him, eyes like sharpened glass. I'm not starting the fire. I'm just pointing to the smoke. Caldwell chuckled, setting the glass down with a gentle clink. Don't be naive. You think America wants to hear about stolen black children and murdered activists? You think voters want to believe their beloved senator built his career on buried truths and burnt bodies? Imani's voice was calm. I don't care what voters want. I care what victims deserve. He approached slowly, now standing just feet away. I'm offering you a chance, Miss Carter. Not just money, safety, security, your own apartment, Ivy League admission, a $10 million trust fund to make sure you and your father never need anything again. She didn't flinch.
As long as I shut up?
As long as you live peacefully, he corrected, lips curling. Do you know what happens when stories like yours go viral? Cities burn, families divide, the justice system collapses under the weight of scrutiny. This country wasn't built to carry this kind of truth. Imani's eyes narrowed. Then maybe it was built wrong. Caldwell's gaze darkened. Your father, Darius. He's still a fugitive on paper, still legally dead, still under investigation for obstruction. You keep pushing this and I promise you I will make sure he goes to trial. I'll make sure he doesn't walk away again. Imani's fingers curled slightly under the table, brushing against the edge of her phone. Still recording. You're threatening my father's life. I'm protecting yours, Caldwell said, stepping back toward the desk. Your mother tried this route too. Idealism. Martyrdom. It didn't end well. Imani stood now, slowly, her heart pounding hard against her ribs but her face unreadable. You keep talking about peace, about silence, but I think you're the one who's scared of what comes next. Caldwell smiled bitterly. I'm not scared of truth, Miss Carter. I'm scared of what people like you do with it. She picked up her phone, eyes locked on him. Then you should be. He didn't stop her as she walked to the door. Didn't follow. Didn't need to. He thought he'd done enough. By the time she reached the elevator, her hands were trembling, not from fear, but fury. The kind that made your spine steel and your pulse hot. She pressed L and leaned against the mirrored wall, watching her reflection harden into resolve. Outside, Darius was already pacing near the parking lot. What happened? He asked, the second she stepped out. She handed him the phone. I got it all. The audio file was over 14 minutes long. Every veiled threat, every offer, every insult to her mother's memory. All of it, clear as day. They didn't wait. They drove straight to Camille's apartment, where the journalist sat up in bed with a half-eaten box of takeout and 3 monitors open. Imani dropped the phone on the table. "We leak it, tonight." Camille listened once, then again, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. "Jesus," she muttered. "He hung himself." "Can you protect the source?" Darius asked. Camille nodded. "We'll say it came anonymously. Then link it to the existing investigation. Let the public connect the dots." "Do it," Imani said. Camille got to work immediately. By 2:14 a.m., a headline hit the Atlanta Tribune site. Exclusive: Senator Richard Caldwell caught threatening whistleblower in secret recording. The article was concise, brutal, and surgical. It included audio clips, transcriptions, and a background profile of Imani's story, careful not to reveal too much, but just enough to set fire to every corner of Caldwell's polished image. Camille knew the formula. She knew how to seed viral ignition. By 2:43 a.m., Night Caldwell leak was trending. By 3 a.m., Imani's phone buzzed non-stop. By 3:21 a.m., cable news picked it up. By 4 a.m., the senator's press team issued a vague statement about doctored audio and partisan attacks. By 6 a.m., major donors began pulling out. By 7:00 a.m., a crowd gathered outside the courthouse chanting her name. Imani sat in Camille's living room, exhausted but wired. The sun was rising, and the world was different now. The lie was broken. The mask was slipping. She had burned the veil to the ground and handed the match to the public. Darius handed her a glass of water. "You just detonated the machine." Imani looked up at the screen where her name scrolled across the news ticker, bold and electric. "Good," she said. "Let them choke on the smoke." Across town, behind the dark glass of a Capitol Hill office, Senator Caldwell watched the footage in silence. Aide after aide rushed in with updates, legal fallout, public statements, news outlets begging for comment. But Caldwell said nothing. Until finally, he stood, walked to his private vault, and unlocked a file marked Carter Protocol, Final. Black Girl Exposes Political Conspiracy. The headline didn't just appear, it erupted. It carved its way across timelines, news tickers, podcast intros, late-night monologues, and college campus flyers like wildfire wrapped in truth. From New York to Oakland, from Atlanta to Chicago, the name Imani Carter lit up every screen and every conversation. She wasn't just the girl who'd unmasked a corrupted father. She had become the face of a reckoning long overdue. The audio clip of Senator Richard Caldwell's threat played on loop. His smooth southern cadence now dissected word by legal analysts and TikTok creators alike. Hashtag surged by the hour. Imani unburied. Caldwell cover-up. Justice for Tasha. The footage of Imani walking past microphones, silent but unbowed, went viral overnight. A snapshot of dignity in the storm. They called her a symbol, a warning, a survivor. Protests began the following morning, outside the Georgia state capitol. What started as a dozen students holding handmade signs swelled into thousands by sundown. Atlanta police kept their distance at first, until a few tried to shut it down. But cameras caught everything now, and no one wanted to be the next headline. Civil rights groups mobilized quickly. The NAACP, the ACLU, and grassroots movements from across the South issued joint statements demanding a full federal investigation. A dozen prominent attorneys volunteered pro bono services. Black churches opened their doors to host rallies, prayer vigils, and emergency community briefings. Billboards lit up across highways. Imani Carter is our daughter too. Darius DJ Lewis hadn't slept in 48 hours. He fielded interviews cautiously, appearing only on select platforms with Camille Chambers by his side. His face, once presumed lost in fire, now filled living rooms across the nation as the father who returned not to reclaim but to protect. His voice, tired but unwavering, repeated the same message. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoring what was stolen. From me. From my daughter. From all of us. And still, Imani didn't speak publicly. She let the truth roar in her silence. Inside her new temporary safe house, a quiet guest home provided by a local activist, she watched the coverage unfold, one headline after another. Sometimes she felt like she was watching another girl on screen, some mythical version of herself crafted by public hunger. But late at night, when the cameras were off and her pendant still pressed cold against her chest, she remembered the fire, the loneliness, the ache of silence forced upon her by a man who bought her identity like property. This was no myth. This was her. The pressure mounted by the day. By the end of the week, the Department of Justice released a statement confirming that the FBI had officially opened a case into the alleged corruption involving former Judge Stanley Parrish, businessman James Holloway, and sitting Senator Richard Caldwell. Investigators began interviewing court clerks, reviewing sealed adoption files, and requesting access to the financial records leaked from Holloway's safe. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Rebecca Miles moved quietly but swiftly. She sat in her chambers, now under round-the-clock surveillance, staring at Imani's custody file once again. It hadn't left her desk since the day Imani said, "He's not my father." With national attention bearing down, and the truth unraveling faster than the legal system could contain, she made a decision. She reopened the original Carter custody case. Within 24 hours, a subpoena was issued to Senator Richard Caldwell, demanding his presence at a federal hearing regarding the legitimacy of the custody transfer and his potential role in judicial corruption. It was a direct strike, and it rattled the system. Caldwell's legal team filed for dismissal, calling it a desperate political stunt and citing sensitive federal obligations, but public opinion had shifted. Even longtime donors began distancing themselves. His face, once a fixture of polished campaign ads, now appeared under headlines demanding resignation. Imani remained grounded, surrounded by a small team of lawyers, mentors, and friends. Darius never left her side. They moved with caution, knowing the machine that had buried her mother once was still capable of striking again. But the cracks had become too wide, too loud, too public. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, an unfamiliar knock echoed through the guest house. Imani answered it herself. Standing on the porch was a woman in her 60s, wrapped in a faded scarf, holding a weathered leather satchel. Her skin was mahogany, her eyes steady, and her posture upright with quiet dignity. "You don't know me," the woman said softly, "but I knew your mother." Imani froze. "My name is Evelyn Rose," she continued. "Tasha and I marched together, worked side by side at the firm. I disappeared after the fire. Had to. But I've been watching you, and I think it's time I gave you what she left behind." Imani stepped aside. Inside, Evelyn opened her satchel with trembling hands and removed a black notebook, battered, thick, and bound with a velvet ribbon. She started writing this after she found out she was pregnant, kept it hidden at our old community office. "I've had it ever since she died." Imani stared at it. "What's in it?" Evelyn looked her in the eye. "Everything." Imani turned the first page and saw her mother's handwriting, looping, elegant, and alive. "If she ever finds this, it means she survived. My daughter is not a victim. She is my voice." Imani closed her eyes. The next war was coming, and now she had her mother's words to lead her through it. "I saw who lit the fire." The room froze. Imani lowered the notebook, its weight now matched only by the weight of the words coming from the doorway. The man who stood there looked older than time, skin weathered by years under smoke and sirens. Uniform long gone, but the memory of it etched into his bones. He removed his cap slowly, eyes dark and sunken, but unwavering. "I was there that night," he said. "Back in 2010. The house on Edgewood. I was the first engine on the scene." Imani stood, heart already racing. "Who are you?" "Name's Vincent Hayes," he said. "Retired firefighter. Been quiet a long time. Too long." Darius stepped forward, cautiously. "You're saying you were at the Carter house when it burned?" Vincent nodded. "I saw things I shouldn't have. Things they told me not to report." Evelyn Rose stepped back, her hand tightening around her satchel. "What did you see?" Imani asked. He took a long breath, his voice crackling with memory. "It wasn't just a fire, it was arson. Accelerants were used. Back windows busted before we even arrived. But when I got inside, your mother wasn't gone. Not yet." The silence thickened. "She was alive?" Imani whispered. "She was crawling through smoke, trying to reach a floor vent," Vincent said, his voice trembling. In her hand was a journal, burnt on the edges. She had wrapped it in a wet towel, like she knew it mattered more than her own body. Imani sat down hard. Her legs couldn't hold the gravity of those words. "I grabbed her," Vincent continued. "She passed out in my arms before we hit the door. By the time we got outside, she wasn't breathing. EMTs said she died en route. But the journal stayed with me. I didn't turn it in. I was scared. A few days later, someone from City Hall showed up at my door, asked questions, offered money, told me she was nobody, told me to forget."
"And you did?" Darius asked sharply.
Vincent met his gaze. "I tried, for years, but this week, I saw her face again." He looked at Imani. "In you." Imani reached across the table, her fingers trembling. "You still have it?" He nodded and pulled a faded cloth-wrapped object from his coat pocket. He laid it down slowly, like a sacred offering, and unwrapped it to reveal a scorched, brittle journal. Black leather, corners charred, spine cracked, but still intact. "Camille Chambers, who had arrived only moments before with her camera and notepad, sat silently in the corner, watching, recording. She knew a story was unfolding that would ripple far beyond headlines. Imani opened the journal gently. The pages were warped from heat and time. Some were unreadable, but many still bled ink, her mother's handwriting, looping, elegant and urgent. Each entry was a timestamp of fear and defiance. Tasha's notes dated back months before the fire, documenting suspicious meetings between Holloway and Judge Parrish, anonymous threats and visits from men who never gave names. One entry read, "James came to the house again, said I'm too loud, said DJ and I are going to regret crossing lines. He had no right to speak her name, my daughter's name, like it was his to claim." Another, "The court won't hear the affidavit. Parrish blocked it. Holloway paid someone off. We're running out of time." And another, darker still, "Darius thinks we're being followed. I keep seeing the same gray sedan near the clinic. I think someone's watching us through the gas meter box. This goes deeper than we thought." Darius leaned over, scanning the words with haunted eyes. "I thought I was being paranoid. I thought maybe we were just scared." "You were right to be scared," Camille said, barely above a whisper. The final third of the journal was fragmented. Some pages reduced to ashes at the edges, others blistered from the heat, but one page near the back remained eerily pristine. It bore a list. Names. Judges, officers, prosecutors, politicians. At the top, Richard Caldwell. Next to his name, orchestrator. Imani exhaled sharply, the sound closer to a sob than a breath. She turned the final page. There, scrawled in shaky, rushed handwriting, as if written moments before her mother collapsed, was a final entry. "If I die, it won't be an accident." Silence filled the room again. Camille slowly closed her laptop. Darius whispered, "She knew." Imani's voice cracked. "And they knew she knew." Vincent Hayes stood again. "I've held this for too long. I failed her. I'm not failing you." "You're not," Imani said, clutching the journal to her chest like armor. "You brought her back." Later that day, Judge Rebecca Miles sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear as she read a digital copy of the journal Camille had just delivered. Her hands trembled. She knew many of the names. Some were dead. Others still served. Her clerk knocked. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "there's a federal prosecutor online too. He says the FBI is requesting immediate access to your chambers." She looked down at the last page again. "If I die, it won't be an accident." Judge Miles picked up the phone. "Tell them," she said, "I'm ready to burn it all down." But in the Capitol, far from the blaze of truth, a different fire had begun. This one lit by those with the most to lose. And one of them still had a badge. The cameras rolled as the double doors swung open. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. The air inside the courthouse felt too thick to breathe, as if history itself had taken a seat in the front row. For the first time in over a decade, the courtroom on Pryor Street brimmed not just with lawyers and witnesses, but with a nation on edge. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the bench. Outside, thousands of voices chanted Imani's name as helicopters circled overhead, banners waved, fists rose, and the steps of the courthouse pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside, Imani Carter walked slowly toward the witness stand, flanked by federal marshals. She wore no makeup, no smile, just a dark blazer over a white blouse, and the silver pendant around her neck restored, gleaming, unbroken. The judge called the room to order as the prosecution began. "Please state your name for the court." "Imani Tasha Carter."
"And your relationship to the defendants?"
Her voice didn't waver. "I'm the daughter of the woman they tried to erase." The room held its breath. Her testimony unfolded like a slow burn, measured, clear, undeniable. She spoke of her childhood under James Holloway, of the lies she was fed about her mother, about the day she met Darius Lewis and her world split in two. She described the moment she discovered the microfilm inside her pendant and the files it revealed. Then she paused and turned to the jury. "They called it a mistake," she said. "My adoption, my silence. But it wasn't. It was a strategy. I was part of the cleanup. I was a child they thought no one would look for." The courtroom remained silent long after the judge called for a recess. Next came Darius. He stepped to the stand as a man once considered dead, a man who had buried too much and was now ready to exhume every inch of it. He recounted the protests, the police intimidation, the fire that took Tasha, and the years he lived as a ghost in his own country. He read excerpts from her journal aloud, voice trembling. She wrote, "If I die, it won't be an accident." She knew what they were doing. She knew who was behind it. And now, so do all of you. Then came the evidence. The microfilm was displayed on the screens before the court, blown-up images of forged court orders, internal memos, payouts signed by James Holloway and initialed by Senator Richard Caldwell. Every timestamp matched, every dotted line pointed in the same direction. The audio recording followed. The courtroom went still as Caldwell's voice filled the speakers. "You want your story buried or your father buried?" When it ended, no one spoke. The defense responded the only way it knew how, by attacking. They questioned Imani's memory, her motives, her emotional stability. They called her a girl traumatized into delusion. They dragged out old-school reports, a counselor's comment about emotional volatility, a teacher's note calling her too confrontational. But it didn't land. The jury watched her calm, firm, unyielding, and saw through the smear. Caldwell's team pivoted to Darius. They called him a radical, said he faked his death, that he'd brainwashed Imani with conspiracy theories. They even hinted he orchestrated the leak to revive his failed legal career. Still, the room didn't shift. The truth was too loud now. But what cracked the case wide open came 3 days into the trial. A former Caldwell aide, Michael Brandt, unexpectedly approached the prosecution. He had worked under Caldwell's campaign for years, handling logistics, media strategy, and eventually hush payments. He carried a laptop filled with encrypted files, internal messages, donor funneling schemes, falsified reports on Darius and Tasha, and surveillance contracts for Imani's school years. When he took the stand, he spoke without looking at Caldwell once. "I was ordered to monitor her," he said. "From the time she was 10, Caldwell said we needed to make sure she never learned the truth. If she ever did, we had options." The word echoed. Judge Miles leaned forward. "Mr. Brandt, are you suggesting Senator Caldwell had contingency plans should Imani Carter discover her real identity?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "And those plans included what?" "Silencing, institutionalization, if necessary, reputation destruction. There were drafts of staged arrests, financial settlements, even forged psychiatric evaluations." A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Caldwell's face remained impassive, but his lead attorney sank slightly in his chair. When the final day of arguments arrived, Camille Chambers sat beside Imani in the gallery. Protesters filled the streets outside, millions watching the live stream nationwide. Schools paused classes, offices turned off meetings. The country had turned its attention not to a trial, but to a reckoning. In her closing argument, the federal prosecutor turned toward the jury. "They burned a woman alive to protect a lie. They stole a child to silence a movement. They buried documents, paid off judges, and turned an entire justice system into their personal playground. But they forgot one thing, that truth can survive fire." She pointed to Imani, and she's sitting right there. The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge silenced them. And then finally, after weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, tears and fury, the judge handed the case to the jury. Deliberations began. Imani stood outside on the courthouse steps as the crowd surged around her, chanting, praying, crying. A woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "My daughter's watching this in school," she whispered. "She said you made her feel visible." Darius stood beside her, silent, holding her hand. Upstairs, 12 jurors sat in silence. One by one, they began to vote. Back in the deliberation room, the jury foreman picked up the final slip of paper. The votes were in. A bell rang. America held its breath. The woman placed a worn leather notebook in Imani's hands, as gently as if she were handing her a heartbeat. "She wrote this for you," she said, eyes glistening. "Said if anything ever happened, and you came looking, you should have this." Imani stared down at the cover. It was cracked around the edges, soft in the corners, the pages swollen from time and tears. A faded ribbon tied it shut, once crimson, now dulled into something closer to rust. The weight of it seemed impossible, small enough to hold in one hand, but heavy enough to collapse a century. She whispered, "She wrote it for me?" The woman nodded. Every word. Back in the safe house, Imani sat cross-legged on the floor, the notebook resting in her lap like sacred scripture. Darius sat nearby, watching her but giving space. He didn't say a word. He knew this moment wasn't his. It belonged to her, and the mother who never stopped speaking, even from beyond the grave. With trembling fingers, Imani untied the ribbon. The first page opened to a photo. Her mother, younger, smiling wide in front of a protest banner, scribbled below in blue ink. "For my daughter, Imani. If you're reading this, you found me. That means they didn't win." Imani's throat clenched. Her hands shook, but she turned the page. There were poems, short, fiery verses that sang of resistance and love. There were affirmations written like lullabies. You are not lost, you are legendary. You were born of fire, not fear. They may hide your truth, but they can't erase your blood. Imani read through blurred eyes, her heart pulsing faster with each word. On the next page, a letter, handwritten, unfinished at the bottom.
My sweet Imani.
If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to finish watching you grow, but I need you to know you were never abandoned. You were taken. I loved you the second I knew you existed. I loved your first kicks. I loved your laugh when it was still air in my lungs. You are my light, my rebellion, my hope. The words unraveled something deep inside her. She pressed the notebook to her chest, curling over it, sobbing. The kind of sob that had no volume, just shaking shoulders and silence and 1,000 aches erupting at once. Darius moved toward her then, kneeling beside her, wrapping his arms around her without saying a word. She cried for the years she had been told she was unloved. She cried for the voice she'd spent her life trying to imagine. She cried for the mother who had fought to leave a trail home. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Imani flipped through more pages. Some were simple daily entries, what her mother ate, thoughts on books she read, sketches of dresses she wanted to sew. Others were sharper, more urgent. He followed me again today. James said I was causing trouble. He knows about the files. I think Darius is scared, but he won't show it. We're both holding on to the idea that truth is armor, but truth makes you a target too. I want her to remember my laugh. I hope it finds her in dreams. The notebook was a living, breathing thing. Part diary, part blueprint, part legacy. Each page carried fingerprints of love and fear, of hope scribbled in the margins between survival plans. Imani flipped to the back, searching for more. The pages thinned as she neared the end. And then she saw it. A page folded into the back cover, marked in red ink. If she ever doubts me. Her breath caught. She unfolded it slowly, delicately. The page crackled from years of silence. At the top, her mother's handwriting again, sharper this time, like it had been written quickly, urgently. If she ever doubts me, tell her this. I stayed because I believed the truth was worth bleeding for. I stayed because I thought I could keep her safe longer by remaining visible, loud and rooted. I stayed because I knew that one day, my voice wouldn't matter, but hers would. Tell her I didn't go quietly. Tell her I etched her name into everything I touched. Walls, pages, dreams. And if they tell her I was nothing, tell her I was her mother. That's everything. Imani stared at the words until they blurred into shapes, then back again. She closed the notebook slowly. Her heart didn't feel broken anymore. It felt rebuilt. Made of new pieces, old echoes, and her mother's breath, still warm between the lines. Outside the house, Camille's car pulled into the driveway, headlights off. She ran toward the porch holding a tablet in her hand. They found something, she said breathlessly. In the archives. An audio file from the night of the fire. A call Tasha made, minutes before it started. Imani's eyes widened. Her mother's voice was about to speak again. Let her story be louder than her silence. The words sat etched into the foundation stone of the new building like scripture. It wasn't large, not yet, just a red brick center on the east side of Atlanta, where the city's heartbeat echoed louder, and the schools received less, and the justice system struck first. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in purpose. Over the entrance hung a sign, the Tasha Carter Center for Youth Justice. Inside, Imani stood before a small crowd of teens, black, brown, and brave-eyed, sharing not her trauma, but her fight. My mother was silenced for telling the truth, she said, voice calm, sure. So this place is for all the voices they try to smother, for every kid they called troubled when they really meant unheard. This center is for the ones they overlook until they're in a courtroom or a casket. There was no podium, no prepared speech, just her words, raw and steady, filling the space like sunlight through stained glass. Behind her stood Darius, now a legal mentor at the center, no longer hiding behind case files or fear. He'd returned to law, not through the courts but through classrooms and workshops. His office was a beat-up desk stacked with books and secondhand legal pads. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he taught Know Your Rights sessions to high schoolers and ran mock trials with middle schoolers who once thought justice was just a word adults used before punishments. Camille Chambers had published a full-length investigative book, Daughter of the Fire, The Story They Couldn't Burn, now a national bestseller, but she still visited the center weekly, giving storytelling seminars and showing girls how to weaponize truth with a pen. And Judge Rebecca Miles? She'd made her last ruling the day after Caldwell's sentencing. She stepped down from the bench with no press conference, No celebration. Just a handwritten letter posted to the courthouse bulletin board that read, "Justice is not a seat. It's a decision, and I choose to stand with the truth now, not behind a desk." She joined a civil rights nonprofit the following week, offering legal aid to wrongfully incarcerated mothers, and helping pass new legislation around family court reform, one of which was named the Carter Clause. In her new role, she worked from church basements, community centers, and shelters, places far louder with justice than her former courtroom had ever been. But it was Imani who remained the center's pulse. She launched workshops on identity reclamation, trauma healing, and youth-led policy change. She wrote grants, spoke at schools, trained other survivors. She met with lawmakers and challenged judges. At night, she wrote poetry on the back porch. Always by hand. Always in the notebook her mother left her. The community followed. What began as a few dozen supporters turned into hundreds. A documentary crew began filming. College students came to volunteer. Even local police were sent for training through the center's restorative justice program, forced for the first time to sit in front of the very kids they'd once profiled. Then one afternoon, weeks after the center opened, a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp, just a first name, scrawled across the front in blue pen, to Imani. She opened it slowly, standing alone in her office as the sun lowered behind her. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Handwritten, slanted, the loops unpracticed, the ink a little smudged. "My name is Trinity. I'm 14. I live in a foster home that don't feel like home. I saw your story on TikTok. The fire, the trial, the pendant. You don't know me, but when I saw you speak, I cried like I knew you forever. I've been quiet my whole life. I didn't know quiet could be a weapon, until I saw you make it scream. I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I'm writing my story now too. I'm not scared no more. Love, Trinity."
Imani pressed the letter to her heart and sat down slowly.
Outside, kids laughed. Someone played music from a speaker in the parking lot. The world continued. But inside, something shifted. The cycle had broken. Her mother hadn't died in vain. Her silence had become someone else's voice. She walked to the wall of the center and pinned Trinity's letter next to dozens of others from girls across the country. Then she took out a fresh notebook, blank, crisp. And on the first page, she wrote, "For the ones still finding their fire. I want to change my last name to Carter." The words were soft but resolute, slicing through the stillness of the courtroom with quiet power. Imani stood tall at the center of the hearing chamber, not flanked by lawyers or surrounded by cameras this time, but alone by choice. She faced the judge's bench with hands clasped in front of her, a simple black dress flowing around her calves and the silver pendant glinting against her chest like a medal forged in fire. The judge, an older black woman with kind eyes and decades carved into her posture, lowered her glasses. "You understand that this change is permanent?" she asked gently. "Yes, Your Honor," Imani replied. "This is your legal identity." "I know. Why Carter?" Imani glanced over her shoulder briefly. In the second row sat Darius, DJ, his eyes wet but proud, hands clasped in his lap. Beside him, Camille clutched her notepad to her chest. A few seats away, Evelyn Rose sat with a quiet smile, holding a copy of the notebook that had changed everything. Imani turned back to the judge. "Because that name is the first truth I ever learned about myself. It was the name my mother carried into every protest, every courtroom, every nightmare. It was the name she fought for when she couldn't fight for herself anymore. It's who I am. It's who I was, even when I didn't know it." The judge didn't respond right away. She simply leaned back in her chair, reached for her pen, and signed the papers with deliberate care. Then she looked up and smiled. Not a courtroom smile, not one of formality, but the kind that women give other women when they know what it took to get there. "Then Imani Tasha Carter," she said softly, "let the record show. Your name is yours again." Applause broke out from the few in attendance. Not loud, not performative, just real clapping that sounded like pages turning, like chapters closing, like doors opening. Darius rose and walked toward her as the judge exited the bench. He stopped just shy of her and looked down, eyes shimmering. "She'd be so proud of you," he whispered, voice cracking. Imani smiled, blinking back tears. "I carry her with every step." Outside, the sky was bright. No clouds, no shadows. A rare golden clarity filled the day, as if the universe had paused just long enough to give her a breath. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps once again, this time not as a victim, or a witness, or a headline. She stood as herself. Carter. The name vibrated in her bones now, reclaimed, rooted, and whole. Behind her, the building that once tried to erase her now stood as a silent monument to what it couldn't bury. Below, people watched, not in crowds like before, not with chants or cameras, just quietly, passers-by, mothers with strollers, students, men in work boots, a little girl holding a copy of the Tribune with Imani's face on the cover. She didn't wave, she didn't speak. She simply descended the steps. Each one a promise. Each one a beginning. Darius met her at the curb, holding open the door of their borrowed sedan. She paused before getting in, turned one last time, and looked back at the place where it all began. "I'm not afraid of it anymore," she said. "Good," he replied, "because it's watching you now." And it was. The nation was watching. Schools were assigning essays on her testimony. Judges were quoting her mother's journal in courtrooms across the country. Cities were renaming blocks after Tasha Carter. The FBI had launched a task force dedicated to identifying similar cases. 2 more sealed adoptions were under review. Investigations continued. But none of that was the ending. It was only the echo. The beginning stood here, in a girl who survived being stolen, silenced, and set on a shelf, and decided to write her own name in fire across the sky. As the car pulled away, Imani opened her notebook and began to write. This time, not for survival, but for legacy. The words pierced the silence like a church bell tolling in the distance, solemn, steady, and irreversible. Inside the packed courtroom, the only movement came from reporters gripping pens, mothers clutching children, and the barely perceptible tremble in Imani's fingers as she sat beside Darius, her gaze fixed on the foreman. Behind them, the gallery was filled with faces carved in hope and fear. Protesters outside had gone quiet, their chants replaced by breathless anticipation. "Find the defendant, Richard Caldwell. Guilty on all counts." A ripple spread through the room. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, falsification of public records, abuse of federal office, witness intimidation. Then came the second name. James Holloway, guilty on all counts. Imani closed her eyes as the weight of it hit her chest. The words didn't bring joy, not in the way fairy tales promised. They brought release, like chains falling off, like truth finally allowed to breathe. The judge, Rebecca Miles, nodded once and addressed the court. Sentencing will be delivered immediately. She glanced briefly toward Caldwell, whose once impenetrable composure had now cracked into visible contempt. He stood still, chin high, but the veneer had been stripped. No handlers, no script, no teleprompter, just a man laid bare by justice. "To Mr. James Holloway," Judge Miles said, voice unwavering, "this court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. For the theft of a child, the manipulation of the legal system, and the role you played in a conspiracy that robbed generations of justice." Holloway didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared at Imani with something between hatred and fear. "To Senator Richard Caldwell," she continued, "this court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." A few gasps escaped the gallery. "For weaponizing your office against the very citizens you swore to protect, for orchestrating a network of silence and suppression, and for the attempted erasure of a truth that belongs to every American, black or otherwise." Caldwell lowered his head for the first time. And then Judge Miles paused. She looked out across the courtroom. Her hands rested on the bench like an anchor, but her voice carried fire. "Let it be clear," she said, "that this is not just a verdict against 2 men. This is a verdict against a system that allowed them to operate for years unchecked, against the silence we've mistaken for peace, against the lies we've told ourselves about fairness in our institutions." She turned her gaze to Imani. "And to the young woman whose name now echoes far beyond these walls, I want to say this. You were never invisible. You were erased, but the world sees you now, and more importantly, you see yourself." The gallery stood in applause before the gavel could even drop. Outside, the courthouse erupted. Cheers, tears, music blaring from car radios. People hugged strangers. Old men saluted her. Children chanted her name. News outlets ran breaking banners. Caldwell sentenced in historic trial. Imani Carter vindicated. Justice for Tasha becomes justice for us all. Imani stepped out onto the courthouse steps, flanked by Camille, Darius, and a team of civil rights attorneys. The crowd split like a sea, allowing her to walk forward. She didn't raise a fist. She didn't wave. She just stood still, radiant, steady, and full of a quiet power that no jury could sentence and no fire could consume. Camera shutters clicked. Microphones extended. Reporters begged for a quote. But she didn't speak. Not yet. She let the moment breathe. As the crowd began to part, and she walked toward the car that would take her back to the safe house. A woman emerged from the edge of the crowd, older, caramel-skinned, eyes damp, voice trembling. "I knew your mother," she said. Imani stopped. The crowd around her seemed to fade, the noise melting into background static. Her eyes locked onto the woman who reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, faded, torn at the edge, but unmistakable. Tasha Carter, standing outside a church, holding a protest sign, smiling wide. "She stayed with me in Selma," the woman whispered. "Before you were born, we were freedom riders together. She saved my life once, and now you saved hers." Imani took the photo, her fingers shaking. "Do you want to know what she used to say back then?" the woman asked, eyes glassy. "What?" Imani whispered. She said, "They can't silence us forever. Even if they kill me, my daughter will scream the truth louder than they ever feared." Imani looked down at the photo, her mother's face shining back at her, unafraid, unbowed. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long, long time, she smiled. Far away, in a cold federal prison cell, a guard slipped a letter under Caldwell's door, postmarked anonymously.